put them here. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, welcome, Aljumaine. Aljumaine here is a career design technologist, artist, and creative manager based in Toronto. Aljumaine is passionate about using design to bridge the gap between visual design, user experience design, and engineering. Their art practice is rooted in Afrofuturism and digital justice in order to subvert systems, and they are also an active member of the Technoscience Research Unit at the University of Toronto. So thank you for being here today, Aljumaine. So how did you decide on the title of your work?
It was mainly related to just lots of thoughts and research around environmentalism and I guess just thinking of nature. That's just really kind of it.
Great, thanks. And what is the role of Blackness and specifically anti-Blackness in your work?
So the role of Blackness in my work is more of a process of finding ways to ground myself and other Black researchers and artists and creatives that I really admire in a sense of rooting, specifically relate to finding ways to exist as powerfully, as passionately, and as creatively as possible in a world that is deeply rooted within oppression, systemic oppression of Black folks and Black communities and systems that exist throughout through our day-to-day that's rooted in anti-Blackness. And so I often center like core ideas of like what it feels for me as a Black person within my work.
Yeah. And you mentioned that your work displays Black folks enjoying nature by living in peace with the land, spending time deep in nature away from the white gaze, and creating opportunities for Black communities to connect with the land in a grounded and meaningful way. Can you expand on that a little bit?
So a large part of my body of work is focused on surveillance technologies, specifically related to how surveillance has been historically created and used to monitor and track Black communities, and as how that technology has been scaled throughout our day-to-day lives through other forms of technology, such as like facial recognition, through Snapchat, location services based off of like phone services, like your iPhone. Like all those technologies are rooted within tracking Black folks. And so for me, it was very important to center this particular piece of work in the earliest moments of my life where I existed in a reality that was outside of being constantly surveilled within a North American context, such as being in nature. I grew up in Jamaica, so I spent a lot of time in beaches and around swamps and in nature, and as well as understanding and relating those stories that I've heard from family members and friends and other Black folks who have these fond memories of just existing and like existing with nature, and how that's so juxtaposed to how living in North America is very different in the sense of, for example, like city planning in most cities is designed in a way for those who have specific class and privilege and funds and access to have direct or more immediate or private access to nature, such as owning a cottage or owning a multi-million-dollar home where you have access to a large backyard or ravines and whatnot. But I think you take a moment to like look at historical data, such as like Stats Canada, for example. You'll see specifically based off of like actual data, the percentages of Black folks who own property and land in North America, and as well as what that reach looks like to have access to nature, to get away from, the oppression that exists being in a city or within large suburbs that are rooted within concrete, as well as most city planning, like kind of right off the jump, is just inherently anti-Black and racist. It just takes a simple look at like data to see a lot of that and to understand a lot of that. And a really quick example of that I can point out to everyone is like, for example, early in 2020, when there was a lot of policing that was happening with respect to folks who were being impacted by the pandemic, based off of the tickets, for example, that were awarded to folks who were out and about during lockdown orders, a staggering number of those folks were actually Black. I think it was something like 68% of tickets that were awarded were to Black folks specifically, which is pretty staggering and unfortunate. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And can you share your process on your choice of using blended animations and footage?
Okay, so the process for this film that I made is kind of complex. So first I started off by searching through found footage through different archives to see what I could find of like historical Black folks in nature. Found some stuff that was pretty okay, but the quality wasn't as good as I'd like. I wanted something that was like high definition, mostly in 4K, that would be vivid. So spent hours ripping through found footage, cutting up footage, then also spending a lot of time creative coding and programming, GLSL to use math and complex vertex shaders and to create the dreamy effect that you actually see that's sort of overlaid over the film. And then I went through this long process of stitching together a lot of the found footage and then merging together about like 40 or 50 hours of hand-coded rendered animations to create a overlay of dreamscape. And following that, I used a lot of field recordings that I've taken from different visits that I've had to different conservation areas across Ontario, and some field recordings of other places I've gone to, other Caribbean countries I've gone to build and weave together different sounds. And then I spent a lot of time composing an actual soundscape for this and stitching it all together and blending all the layers together. And then, of course, came the long process of processing everything in Adobe After Effects in Adobe Premiere, as well as revisiting the different renders to see how they blend in with the different visual footage that's seen in the actual animations. And then and a lot of time rewatching it over and over again, and then cutting different parts of it and relaying and resyncing different parts of the film and reordering it. Yeah, it's a very long process.
Yeah, well, thank you for all your hard work. I like that you use dreamy effect. It's definitely how I describe it as well. So you mentioned that Black folks' connection to nature is often negotiated by white supremacy and property ownership. And you talked about, the cottages and how urban design and city planning, that's all sort of geared towards one group of people. And how might your work imagine an alternative world where we are freed from these structures?
That's a great question. So I think at the root of the work that I've made and work that I've been thinking a lot of is just finding ways to place an emphasis of Black folks enjoying themselves and Black folks experiencing deep moments of joy, and Black folks living in ease, and mostly Black folks being in nature and doing absolutely whatever they want, whenever they want, with friends or alone, and as well as enjoying nature as it was intended. And by finding ways to focus and center that specific lived experience, it's already rooted within being pro-Black and being in a way that is the polar opposite towards the day-to-day systems that most Black folks move through that are just, inherently oppressive. And for me anyway, it's like spending a lot of time in nature, and a lot of other Black friends that I have who spend time in nature find peace in a way that is like very grounding and nurturing. And it's just another way of centering that joy.
Yeah. So you talk a lot about, Black folks in nature, and you said that Black folks in nature center the notion of an embodied resistance to white supremacy. How might other artists engage this topic?
So when I specifically speak to that, I'm speaking of a process in which like Black artists can specifically focus on creating artwork that is culturally specific to them, tied to their heritage and things related to being within the land and existing with the land. In many ways, how all Black diaspora communities have existed prior to being colonized and prior to, oppression and whatnot. And so I guess like for other artists, it's just finding ways to center your Blackness and being proud of the things and ideas that you create. I think that like for me personally, there was a moment in my life when as an artist where I wasn't sure of there being spaces for me to share things that were too Black focused or too focused on surveillance. And a lot of those times, certain organizations who have board of directors, for example, that are predominantly white, become uncomfortable with the ideas of centering things that are very Black focused. And eventually I realized that I just wanted to create things for me, myself, and for Black communities to hopefully take inspiration in that lived experience. And the one thing I want to share related to that, like one of the films that I watched that deeply inspired me to focus on environmentalism and Blackness, existing as it is called Hale County This Morning, This Evening. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend watching it. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And it's just mostly about this Black family in the South just existing throughout their day-to-day life.
Thank you. And what does being Black and free mean to you?
For me, it's another way of centering myself in aspects of having joy, finding things that bring me happiness throughout my day-to-day life, regardless of the challenges that I might face. Finding ways to be excited about cultural things that happen in my family or other Black folks that are in my life who live in diasporas, and creating work that is unapologetically Black focused and showcasing that as open as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. We're gonna open it up to the audience now for Q&A. If anybody has any further questions.
Hi, Aljumaine. What advice would you offer to up-and-coming artists?
So the best advice I can offer to you is to create as much as you can, as often as you can, and to also apply for things as they come up and share your work as much as you can on social media. The more people that see it, the more opportunities you'll have to create artwork that you want to.
I want to ask because during one of, I guess, the break interviews, I took some time to kind of watch and observe the film and stuff, and I noticed that when I first started watching it, it felt very trippy with all the vibrant colors, and then I also felt disorganized because I was hearing sounds of ocean while people were walking over grass, and then as I started to watch it more, it kind of like made more sense together. How did you like know to mush all these different aspects that at first seem trippy and then make sense later on?
Thank you. That's a great question. So for the longest while, I've been going through this phase of being really interested in mycelial networks and mushrooms, and specifically how mycelial networks and mushrooms and fungi sort of like this symbiosis or symbiotic relationship that exists in nature. And so I've been exploring a lot of ideas related to dreaming and dreaming imagery, and as well as finding different ways to pose things that you visually see that are different to things that you visually hear, and as well as how they can be very disorienting or very centering.
I find that within my own network, especially with Black Canadians, we find that exploring nature, being outside in the cold around bugs, we're not very into that. how would you kind of inspire people to go out and unlearn the habits that they've learned so far to kind of explore nature and find inspiration in that?
Thank you. That's a great question. So one of the first things I did, I had this unique opportunity to go camping, actually, years and years ago with a good friend of mine that suggested this campground that was actually based off indigenous land. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's super, super far west. And so I spent about 8 days camping in total. 4 of those days I spent alone, just walking through the woods, being in nature and just sort of like not really replying to emails or doing anything like that. My suggestion to any Black folks that want to go camping is just find a good friend or two to do it with. Find someone you enjoy spending company with, and to just pick a camping spot that's private somewhere and just try it out. Even if it's just for like one night or a couple of days, it makes a huge difference. And that experience could be very paradigm shifting, especially while living here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, I think we have time for one final question. Yep.
Yeah, so I came to know that you have a background in augmented and virtual reality as well. So could you have share some ideas about how can we use these futuristic technologies into using them and bringing ahead the idea better and in a more impactful way?
Thank you. That's a good question. So I guess like the first example I can give you is like maybe you might be familiar with Unity. You could use Unity and their VR technologies to blend forward, like to blend film, for example, or 3D models to create 3D environments for folks to enjoy or experience. Or if you want to make it really simple, you can even use Facebook's filter kit to create filters, which are super easy and super accessible and really fast. If you spend 30 minutes like watching a tutorial, you can have something made just using your examples. That's pretty accurate and really compelling for augmented reality. You can import your own videos and illustrations and whatnot as well. And do really interesting things such as creating face filters or sticker packs, for example. So my suggestion is just try it out. There's a lot of like really easy and free tools you can use. Blender, for example, has some pretty cool built-in virtual reality technologies that you can also use as well, really quickly and very easy. It's completely free.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Aljumaine, for joining us today and for talking with us about your art. Did you want to quickly shout out your website or your social media so that people could check out more of your work?
Thank you. So you can find me at Aljumaine on Instagram. So I post things for more professional, I guess, or larger scale work. You can find me at aljumaine.com, which is, I think, pretty easy. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you so much.